Welcome to episode 9 of the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Andrew Coates, and he is going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself.
Hey, Ross, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. If anybody's found this on my feed, you'll hear Ross's Irish accent. And, my mother was born in Ireland, so I'm an Irish citizen, never been there. But I'm Canadian. I'm from originally from the east coast of Canada, St. John's, Newfoundland. But I live in Edmonton, Alberta, which is probably the northernmost large city in North America. That's super fun. It's already starting to get cold here. I've been a personal trainer for 11 years, 6 with a commercial gym, 5 with my own company. And along that path, I guess I started a podcast 4 years ago, and that's been fun. So I love and appreciate podcasting. I've been a fitness writer for quite a while. I've written for T Nation for about 3 years, and that's led to writing for the PTDC and Generation Iron. And there's some stuff in the works that I never share until it's officially published. And I also mentor coaches as well, but I don't go into that business coach space because there's a handful of good and there's a lot of bad. And and I also happen to like playing around on Instagram. So that's been sort of a content playground for the last couple of years, which has been really fun and rather rewarding. So when we think of all the social media stuff and how bad it can be, I think if you use it intentionally, it can do a lot of good for your career.
Yeah, that word intention is very important. It's something I'm trying to do myself more, but it's like the apps are so good at distracting you that if you drop the ball at all, they kind of suck you in. So just in terms of your own like fitness philosophy, I know you write a lot of articles. How I found you is your philosophy seemed to be pretty prominent on your posts. It's very, very engaging and very like practical. And, you were able to help me a little bit as well, kind of mentoring. What is your kind of like, approach to the health? And then like, what do you kind of try and pass on to your clients?
Anybody that comes to train with me, I try to come, whether their goal is weight loss, whether they want to put on a lot of muscle, whatever age they are, is to make it a fun, enjoyable, sustainable experience. And that sort of sounds cliche, but I think it does underpin everything we should be doing. Yes, if you're working primarily with athletes who are going to listen to everything you're saying, then there's a more immediate, hey, you have to optimize training for performance. But let's say you get young athletes. You're also a role model into giving them the skills and tools to be able to do it for a lifetime. If you're dealing with very high level athletes, there's probably going to be a point where they transition away from high level competition into everyday life. So these aspects permeate everything. You get someone who's a big weight loss client. We've all worked with them and we know they're statistically very prone to relapsing. So, if they get discouraged in the face of a plateau, the relationship that you form with them and the experience that they keep returning to, if they enjoy it and they feel strong and they enjoy pursuing strength, they're far more likely to get through that plateau, continue to see weight loss progress. Or if they reach the kind of goal that they've ultimately set out for themselves, they don't just go, okay, I've done it. Now I'm going to go back to the couch and I'm going to go back to eating the way I used to. That's a battle. Instead, they found a new lifestyle that they love and it becomes a core part of their identity. So I always try to help wherever someone's starting, help them foster an identity built around a fit, active lifestyle. I talk aggressively about lifting weights, and I think that resistance training is still the best option of a broad array of ways that we can consume fitness. It's not the only way. You have to help people find something that ultimately is going to keep them consistent. So that's the underpinning of everything.
Brilliant. Yeah, I really like that. It kind of feels as though you're saying that you're trying to get people to make fitness their own and stick with it for the long term. And one of your posts, I think your client's name is Larry. Is that right? Larry. So he's an older client. Could you tell us a little bit about him? He's like, the posts seem inspirational and it seems like a lot of fun. And I love to see them. So I guess would you talk about how your philosophy has worked for him and then training older clients?
Well, a lot of what I just said is true. So I don't know if a lot of your audience are other coaches. So you probably heard the hero's journey philosophy, Joseph Campbell stuff. You're supposed to be Gandalf. You're not, Frodo, right? You do want to write a really compelling story or showcase a compelling story around someone. Larry is 71. He started this stuff in his late 60s. His wife had passed about 5 years ago. He went through a rough patch after that. And he originally started training with a friend of mine that he'd known, family connection. And that friend had moved on from the industry. Larry had taken a break. And when he was ready to come back, that friend asked if I would take him. So Larry and I sat down and met, and we liked each other right away. And it's been, 2 times a week since then. And with Larry, I know that he would have probably struggled to transition to a new gym and a new relationship if he didn't like spending time with me. So on my social media, you see Larry deadlifting trap bar 400 pounds, or farmers carries with 120, 130 pounds across our turf at Evolve, or he's actually got a really good squat. But what doesn't get seen is the conversation and the stuff in between. That's a relationship. And Larry and I get along very well. We've sat down and had a scotch together at one point. And, he's got stories, he's got wisdom, he's got life experience, which I always like plugging into. And we debate and talk about, things that we're interested in. And that forges the relationship that he values, that helps keep him coming back. Also, expressing strength and feeling strong in the gym is something he keeps coming back to. If I was just militant about, here, do this, and erected these very firm, hard boundaries about, getting to know someone, and each trainer is very different in terms of like kind of that boundary and the relationship they form with the clients. But I don't know that Larry might have stuck with it. And I certainly think we have a responsibility that people are seeking our help to help get those habits and that lifestyle entrenched for the long term, because we know we're competing against the messaging and marketing of quick fixes. And a lot of people want easy results without a lot of effort, and they want to do it for a little while, and then they want to go right back to the couch, and they want to go right back to the chips and ice cream and think, well, if I could only lose the weight, then I could live the way I want to live. We all know what the truth of that. So instead, Larry, like all my other clients, I just approach from how can I make this the most positive and welcoming experience that they want to return to every day? And part of that's our relationship. And part of that's getting them to do things in a gym setting that is pretty optimal for them, that they enjoy the most, they feel strong at, and they want to return to and do more.
Brilliant. Yeah. That actually reminds me of something I heard about therapy recently. And like the best predictor of success for someone in therapy is the relationship they have with the therapist. And I like to think that applies to any one-to-one situation. It's all about relationships, really. So I would firmly believe that a big part of his success with his training, deadlifting 180 kilos at 71 years old is crazy. So it's like he has a lot of trust in you to be able to do that.
You're right. Trust is a major factor. Your clients do have to feel a very strong sense of trust to sometimes reveal aspects of what's really going on, what's really motivating, what sometimes is interfering and in the way of them changing some of the behaviors. There are a lot of people we work with would love to have a result, but they're actually afraid of letting go of something that is standing in the way of them getting results. And whether it's the way that we create the messaging around lifestyle change. If someone thinks that they have to starve and restrict themselves and they enjoy food, and that's what they see in media, then they're going to be very reluctant to make even small changes for fear of having to give it up forever. And that's why good messaging around nutrition and, letting people know, hey, be very careful about dichotomous, good food, bad food language, and let people realize that, yes, you can sustain the things that really matter. I just like to get people to look at what's all the extra shit that you kind of look and go, oh, I don't feel great after eating that. It wasn't that good. And they're just eating out of boredom. I mean, that's a more specific topic, but if you can get people to realize, wait a minute, I get to keep some of the stuff I really treasure within reason. And then if I make all these other sort of changes that are fairly painless, I can achieve long-term results. But it's breaking down their misconceptions coming into the process.
Misconceptions. We could do a whole podcast on that. Something that you're making me think of myself, my own coaching, is that one of the biggest parts that I enjoy is just having a good conversation with the client outside of the actual sets they're doing and outside of the personal training. Is that something you enjoy, or what do you think you enjoy most about working with clients?
I think there's several aspects to it. From the trainer's point of view, how many trainers relate to, working, getting up fairly early in the morning and working till late in the evening, maybe it's split shift work or crazy hours. You hear some people in the industry talk about really punching crazy hours. If anyone's familiar with a guy named Mark Megna, Mark's the owner of Anatomy in Miami. Phenomenal guy. He did a presentation recently at an event I was at. Mark's a former NFL guy, played in the CFL here in Canada, and then got into fitness. And there's plenty of other examples of these trainers who've like punched these kind of hours. I've worked crazy hours across my career. You can't sustain that kind of on the floor effort if you're not enjoying it. So if you can find common ground with a client of stuff you enjoy talking about, because there comes a point where there's not much more to say on an ongoing basis about sets and reps and technique points. And you have those clients who are there because they enjoy the experience, they value the accountability. It's something that they want in their life. But outside of like little pockets, they don't necessarily need a lot of like aggressive technical work on their stuff. And there's only so much bandwidth we have for getting into habit-based nutrition and lifestyle behavior stuff too. There's going to be room for what they're interested in. Now, I'm not a big NFL football guy, but a lot of coaches are. If your clients are fans of football or whatever other sport, I used to play World of Warcraft. I won't dare go near it now because of the time and the level of addiction, but it's a nostalgic part of my life that goes back a lot, to 12 to 15 years ago. But I have a few clients who are playing the new revamped classic World of Warcraft, for anybody who's familiar with it. If you're not into video games, you might not get it. I'm also a big Witcher fan. Witcher 3 is great. And I can geek out over World of Warcraft and listen to my clients who are in progressive raiding right now. If you know the language, you'll understand. And it's really cool to have them tell me about stuff that I remember from over a decade ago and revisit it in a shared experience. And that is really, really fun. Or if it's some other thing that you find really interesting and you're passionate about. And sometimes it's diving into things that the careers, the life, where your clients are from. I've trained clients who live in Canada here in Edmonton, but are from all over the world. They've come from Sri Lanka, tons from India, from certainly in the US, South America, Africa, you name it. Like they come from all over the globe, European clients. And hearing about where they grew up and the aspects of the culture there, I find that stuff incredibly fascinating. So there is so much you can enjoy from the experience, which will help you sustain the energy and the interest and the passion for what you're doing. Now, that's also a two-way thing. Your clients are having a really great experience and they want to keep coming to you. It helps, like I said earlier, with their sustainability, their consistency. Maybe they don't love exercise. A lot of people are starting out, they don't love it. They're scared of it. But your relationship with them might be enough to keep them coming back to the point where they actually feel safer with it, or they trust it more, or they eventually develop. Maybe they never love it, but they realize, okay, this is an important part of my life that I need to sustain so I can, feel healthy and strong.
Yeah, they keep coming back enough to where they figure out a way that they can make fitness their own, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you keep on trying different things with them, adapting their program, and they find something that they really enjoy. Just going back then to the misconceptions, what are some of the kind of the most common ones you see with clients and some of the ones that plague, like, I'd say, health and fitness the most?
I'm not even sure where to begin on that one. I think we're always kind of myth busting with the work that we do. The nutrition ones are very common. People think that carbs are the bad thing, or, so once you get people who think carbs are the devil, they're the bad stuff, calories don't matter. I think it's more important not to, quote, educate or make the client feel like they're wrong. It's more about praising the effort that they've put into kind of learning about these things and developing. It goes back to the trust and the relationship you build with them. And then at certain points, you can turn around and go, okay, so this is a common and popular misconception. This is actually kind of how the science of this works. So there's just so many aspects of nutrition, and not much is like popping to mind. I think another one certainly is they need to do cardio for fat loss, and then getting them to go, okay, well, nutrition is really going to be the best driver of, if you want to lose body fat. Now, if you enjoy cardio or you want to do various conditioning work, cool. That's great for you because it's good for your cardiovascular health. It's good for Your mental health is good. It's good for a lot of things, and it can further the calories out equation. But we don't want to start with cardio as a fat loss tool without getting the nutrition layered in first. And we don't want to bias towards cardio for fat loss when resistance training is actually a much better use of our time in a one-to-one dichotomous decision. You only have time for one thing. All of the benefits, the building muscle, building metabolic rate, the recovery, the strengthening of bones, all of the physical and mental benefits of resistance training. If I had to choose one-to-one, I take that every time over straight cardio. But you add into each person's program the things that they enjoy, they will do, and as much as they have the time and the ability to do it.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of make their training as efficient as possible. You spoke about playing video games. You had a drink with a client. Can you do you think, let's say someone's listening, they're like, I don't want to give up those things. How can someone kind of keep up those habits and things they enjoy in their life, but then also, make progress, say, for example, working with you in 2 sessions a week, like Larry?
Well, it does, in a way, tap into how important it is to them and how badly they want it, and if they're willing to schedule it. So it has to start there. And then it's just, like I said, it's having them really enjoy the process to where their work has become a non-negotiable. And that's something that goes into the schedule. It's not unlike, our personal finances and saving. You can try to save by saving whatever's left over after you spend. That's not that efficient. Or you can make sure that saving is a locked in priority, and then you can spend whatever's left over after you save. And you just flip that philosophy. Well, it's the same thing with the way we spend our time. If you prioritize and put into the schedule the essentials for your long-term well-being, and then you can spend what's left over on the other recreations you enjoy. And it's building that trust to where someone understands and sees that, yes, there's room for all of it, and not necessarily like everything under the sun. There's only so much time in life, but there is room for exercise, and there is room for, recreational activity. Now, it's important to add a caveat here, because if you talk about these things on social media, there's a certain cultural mindset that really pushes back. It's really nasty. I don't get caught up in like social ideological stuff. I don't like the extreme stuff on either end. But when you start seeing people go like pushing back and getting nasty with you because that message doesn't apply to everybody, because we have people in society who are working 2 or 3 jobs to stay afloat, or, new parents who are having trouble getting sleep. Yes, we get that. We understand that. But that doesn't invalidate the message for the overwhelming majority of people who we're still trying to help. Fitness professionals are still trying to come from a constructive place. I think it's worth being thoughtful with the message. But if you do bump into the type of people who are more interested in policing what you're saying and how you're saying it when you're trying to be helpful, I think those type of people are more or less engaging in a type of self-righteousness where they're giving themselves a big pat on the back for policing what other people are saying when they're actually not contributing anything positive at all. So if you're dealing with those kind of people, quite frankly, and they pop up rarely, but every once in a while, that's a pretty quick block, because if their intentions are disingenuous and they're just being hostile, they're gone. So you don't have to allow these people into your space or to damage your emotional well-being or interfere with your mission. If it's someone that's, you have a relationship with, well, maybe that's a conversation that's best taken off the public space and let them know, listen, the overall message and mission here is to reach and empower as many people as possible. And just because they're going to be people in a very diverse array of our society that this may not apply to, does not mean that it's not a good message for most people. Not every message can be, quote, inclusive of every single person's circumstance. And that is not a reason not to continue to deliver these messages and help everybody you can.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. You're kind of preaching to the choir here in San Francisco. We have a lot of that.
I figure San Francisco is probably got a lot of that stuff going on, from what I hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember a joke at a comedy show. It was like somebody was complaining about a problem, but in San Francisco, someone else complains about the person complaining about the problem and tries to police them. And nothing actually ends up getting done in the end. So something that's pretty common. So, you know, policing is something that we could see less of in the fitness industry. Is there anything else that you think you would like to change in the fitness industry if you could, to kind of improve maybe the general population's health as a whole, or how they learn about health information or practice health?
There's a lot of stuff in there. I think coaches spend a little bit too much time lecturing each other on how they do things. And I'm going to try to be careful not to contradict myself. An example is when more established individuals in the industry make statements that come off as being, gatekeeping. So gatekeeper syndrome. If you ever see something like personal trainers need to spend 5 years working in person with clients before they, should be going online to coach people. Okay, cool. That's nonsense. I've written an article on that whole thing. And especially the last 18 months, I think a lot of coaches now are going to be learning online as a sort of a hybrid concurrent with their in-person stuff, even at the beginning. And the argument is, well, you don't know enough to be a coach online. Well, shit, as starting out as a personal trainer, you probably don't know enough to be an in-person trainer too. You have to get started somewhere. Yes, I think that being a great in-person coach and having a lot of experience there is going to be a major asset to online. But if someone's more interested in kind of gatekeeping these things, well, I don't think their message is really serving you. Another popular one is when people whine, and it's whining about influencers in the online space and how we should have greater regulation in the industry. I've talked about this a little bit, and this gets polarizing. But when I hear people calling for greater regulation, I'm like, all right, so what's that going to do? That's not going to make the Instagram influencers who aren't certified, they're not going to go away. Instagram's not going to go, oh, you guys don't have the certification, you can't talk about fitness. They're still going to exist. And I think it's a whine that comes from a place of entitlement and envy, where trainers feel like they're entitled. Well, I should have those clients because I'm more qualified. I went to school for this, and this person is showing their abs on Instagram. Well, okay, what can you learn from the person showing their abs on Instagram, yet do it with integrity and do it with more quality? And it kind of, to me, says, well, you're struggling to fill your own, schedule with clientele to help. Your energy would be best served not complaining about the way things are, but to focus on as much of your own education, your marketing skills, sales skills, brand building, and attract more people. Because I don't think people who are really busy serving their clients are spending a lot of time complaining about what the influencers are doing on social media, because they're never going away. And it's a broader philosophy. It's getting people to focus on what they can control and putting effort into that versus complaining about what's beyond their control, right? It's the old, I can't remember the exact thing, but it's, expecting the world to change for you versus changing you so you can make a greater impact on the world. And I think this is an important part of our careers as coaches. I think it's an important part of our own individual fitness journeys. A lot of people who fall into fitness, myself included, we underwent a personal, kind of lifestyle transformation that became a passion and, embedded part of our identity that turned into a career. And that means taking ownership. That means, individual responsibility. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. And it kind of goes back to the people who are policing what they say. I think sometimes that message, they would rather, tell people, oh no, they're there. It's not your fault. The world is a bad place. You don't have to worry about this. Let's make the people who are talking about this go away. And that's not reality. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole either, because, I try to steer clear of this stuff. What would I change? I don't know if there's a lot to change, because we're competing against human nature, the human desire to, sit in front of Netflix and eat hyper palatable food that, is readily abundant in supermarkets and in fast food places. And that's a metaphor for what's going on. It's not literally everybody's experience. So we have to create a more compelling message, a fun brand, and a relationship with people to get them to experience how great it feels to kind of be more like what our lives are like with fitness, to realize, hey, you have more energy. You your mood is better, your mental health is better, you feel stronger, you look younger, you feel better about going into getting a little older. And if people start buying into that whole thing, and it's your responsibility as a coach to present that both to the client in front of you and to anybody who's, diving into your media. And we're not going to change the world, but we can certainly help one person at a time. And if that person has a great experience and they start telling their family and friends, and maybe you start working with those people, or maybe a few new people follow you because they like what you posted, or something you've written somewhere, or your YouTube channel or your podcast. And that person starts plugging a little bit more into your message, and it starts sitting top of mind. And maybe they're not ready to change today, but maybe 3 to 6 months from now, they're like, I really got to go talk to this person and see if they're taking on clients, or maybe it just inspires them to go to the gym on their own. Either way, those little imprints add up across our society.
Yeah, we're definitely fighting a battle against human nature. And I think it's almost like a little war of attrition where you can get through to someone over time by just staying the course with, your own philosophy. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And, you'd like to think that our message is like a message that people can follow for the long term, that will, serve their best interests, as opposed to, things that are on social media that, it's just purely, we'll say, for profit. What are the kind of the tips you had in that post about misinformation, and just, a guide to avoiding falling prey to misinformation?
Are we talking from the coach's perspective, or are we talking from the consumer's perspective?
Consumer's perspective.
I don't know how I really want to answer this. There's a lot of dimensions to come at this. I think anybody who's listening is already probably converted to our way of thinking anyway. So for that person, because I don't think anyone else is listening, I think it's finding people in our space that resonate with you. And so there are going to be a lot of fitness professionals with a lot of different personal brands and personalities and aspects to what they teach. The people that don't resonate with you, or you find off-putting, well, don't use those as examples of the rest of the industry. And don't think in terms of, or subscribe to this idea that the industry itself is this toxic, horrible place. It will be if you believe that and you go looking for it and all the examples of that. Instead, go looking for the people who have integrity, or sharing great information, things that motivate you, align with you, and the things that when you see on a casual basis as you consume it on social media, maybe it just gives you a little bit of that pump on a bad day when you were feeling a bit sluggish. That's what I would plug into for that type of person. And I don't know. I don't know if I can really do this question justice, but I'm happy to talk about it more if you have more insight into how to frame it.
Yeah. So I think there's like a lot of poorly formed sources of information out there, or, documentaries, for example, or people maybe trying to like just make money and not actually thinking of what value they can offer to a potential client or consumer out there. So then basically the information that someone's putting out is actually like disingenuous, or something they haven't really got experience with. How would someone, I guess, spot, we'll say a good documentary from a bad one, or like a charlatan from, someone with integrity?
I really do believe it becomes finding resources you trust. And you have to want to first. So I don't know if I have a really easy way to say, how do you get someone who's completely bought into Gwyneth Paltrow's website, or, Dr. Oz's stuff, to get them over to, digging into John Berardi and Dr. Mike Isertel, right? Dr. John Berardi. But if you're already a little bit over that way, again, find people who are evidence-based community and, authorities. And it doesn't need to be someone who's a PhD. It can be a Jordan Syatt or, a Susan Niebergall, who are really amazing with their brand and the information they share that's really evidence-based. But find someone that you trust who's credible, and then make sure that you're at least plugging into the things they're doing. Dive into their articles, and it becomes a choice to educate yourself, and it becomes a choice to fight against any inclination toward biases or beliefs that you want to validate by seeking confirming information. And what we're talking about here is not easy stuff for the average everyday general population person. I think if anything, yes, the onus is always on the everyday person to learn from their experiences and find better information. And sometimes that will come with reading the wrong books and following the wrong people before you've had enough of an experience where you decide, okay, cool, I have to try something different. But it's on people in our world, fitness professionals, to, instead of complaining about quote influencers, go out and beat the influencers at their own game. And maybe it's building a following. Maybe it's creating some sort of long form content vehicle like article writing or a podcast or YouTube that reaches more eyes and ears, to where it is appealing to someone who's a bit more general population. And then they go, well, this looks cool. I'm going to go check this out. And it draws in people. And I don't want to say, but it almost rescues them from mainstream bullshit. So I still think a big responsibility is on the personal trainer, on the coach, on the fitness professional. And it doesn't start with complaining about the people who are doing it wrong. It starts with you doing everything you can to do it better.
Yeah, kind of like the quote, it's like, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of your other posts then was about leading your clients to success. And, we talked about trust already. So how do you build trust with clients? Let's say someone who hasn't found exercise to be enjoyable. And how do you typically lead someone to success? I guess you touched on it already, but just in a little bit more detail.
We've touched on it already, but you ask a lot of questions. You find out how they feel about the experience. You, as a default setting, you ease people in versus crush them and leave them so sore they never want to return. You try to find the things. There are certain exercises that I find universally just clients will enjoy a bit more. Being able to do a trap bar deadlift, it's not for everybody, but some people like the expression of strength. I find that, farmers carries actually tend to work really well. Not only are they one of the best things you can do with anybody, but most people are pretty good at them and they don't make people crazy sore. They're usually pretty good about pushing a sled around. They kind of find that fun, even if it's tough. Bench pressing is usually kind of fun. And there are other things along the way, like not everybody's like love squats. Some do, but they're usually okay with sitting in a leg press. And if someone, turns around and says to you, oh, you shouldn't have people doing a leg press. It's a machine, they should be squatting. I mean, like, okay, but then there's the context of the individual person in front of you. And if that person really fucking hates doing squats, but will sit in a leg press and you're making sure their technique is good, that is a gateway to eventually getting them to do a good squat. Cool. Okay. Or maybe you give them very small doses of things like, lunges or a split squat variation. That's important because you want them to do single leg work, but they're much more content to do a squat. Okay. Well, I'll bias more towards squat with sprinkling in the single leg stuff to make sure it's covered until I know that they're enjoying it and the habit's so entrenched that there's less resistance to doing the things that they don't necessarily love. It's certainly not forcing clients to do shit that they hate. There's a lot of different ways we can achieve the goals that our clients have set without making them do, like, burpees are such a contentious argument in the industry. And most people in the industry kind of just default to, oh, they're garbage. And then there's always a few people are like, well, no, it's like they're practical and this, blah, 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 whatever. I mean, I think there's a nuance in between. I haven't programmed a burpee, I think, with a client in forever, because I actually think usually they're used in a lazy fashion, right? They're used where maybe other things would probably be better, but the trader just decides, all right, well, I want to get your heart rate up and make you tired, and I'm going to give you a burpee at the end for cardio. And that's not a good use of a burpee. But what if someone is training for police services or has a physical that there is literally a burpee component in their physical or in the training that they're being put through in whatever course they're approaching their physical for? So I need them to be skilled at a burpee, or I need them to be skilled at a certain type of exercise that I wouldn't give to a client. Well, okay, I better teach them how to do it safely and effectively so they don't get hurt when they're in a group of 100 recruits with two police officers directing a group and making them run around and tire them out for an hour to see how mentally tough they are, when they don't have the skill or the attention to be able to make sure that each person's walking lunges are technically safe and the person's not risking injury. So I don't know. I think like I said earlier, trainers like to get into these arguments and fight over things. Pay attention to who's arguing on Facebook about trivialities. That's not good use of your time. But that's a side note.
Yeah, that's funny you should say about the burpees. Like, um, nearly always when I have a consultation with a client, I'm like, what should we avoid? What do you not want to do? It's nearly always burpees. Burpees are like nearly top of the list. Um, and then enjoyment, of course, is like a really big part of training. And one of your recent posts, you said, what you've done as you've aged, 20s, 30s, 40s. So how do you still enjoy training into your 40s? Having trained for a long time, what's like some kind of things you do to still enjoy it?
It's a default setting. It's for a very long time, it's become the thing that I look forward to at the end of the day. So I just literally think, okay, cool. I've got clients from here to here. My day's done at 8 or 9 in the evening, and then I'm going to go work out. Right? I've pre-made the decision, but it's a default setting. It's part of who I am and what I love doing. I have to talk myself out of working out. Within that, I still make sure that the style of training is something I enjoy. And I grew up probably heavily influenced by a bodybuilding training style and ideology. So a lot of my workout structure is still in that realm, but I've modified and adjusted and tinkered with things over the years to accommodate, a left shoulder injury, discomfort that doesn't let me do everything I used to be able to do, and make sure that it's something that I don't dread. Because if I start doing things that I don't look forward to, I could compromise the consistent habit and relationship that I've got with it. Yeah, it's something that I really enjoy, and I make sure that it's a sacred part of my day. I've got some some music to listen to that I really enjoy. Like my recent post is like, if I'm ever stuck in a situation where I have to listen to the gym music and Will Smith's Getting Jiggy With It comes on, I want to claw out my ears. I try not to subject myself to that. Instead, I'll go listen to something I think is a bit more appropriate for the gym.
Yeah, you try and plan in advance to make it as enjoyable as possible, which is like something I'm really preaching to clients a lot. You can really make your workout routine a lot harder than it needs to be if you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. But in terms of the injury, so you spoke of your shoulder injury. How do you you have a post, pain or discomfort during exercise? How do you kind of work around that and like stay motivated to train if you have like a niggling injury or an ache? Because something I try to think of is like we can always do something, and we have to take responsibility for our health. So it's like it's very easy to use an injury as an excuse not to train. But I guess how do you still train while I guess not feeling 100% or having some sort of injury?
Well, you identify the things that are, like you can think in terms of like red light, yellow light, and green light. You identify the red light stuff, the stuff that will hurt, it causes pain, you physically just can't get in the range of motion doing, and you take that stuff out. And then you engineer ways to train the same muscle groups or essentially get a similar effect with a different motion. So a good example of something that doesn't work for me anymore is a dumbbell shoulder press with my elbows flared out in a wider position. My left shoulder doesn't tolerate that. It doesn't tolerate pull-ups anymore. Again, it's a pulling motion in that wide position. But underhanded chin-ups, neutral grip chin-ups are fine. Landmine pressing, or if my elbows are tucked to the midline of my body and I've got a barbell in hands and I'm seated, then those things are all great for my shoulders. So as long as I'm not doing a whole bunch of stuff to piss it off and make it worse, then most everything else works fine. Barbell bench pressing doesn't feel good on anymore, but I'm actually okay with a football bar. So if I get a neutral grip bar position or neutral grip dumbbells, cool. I can do bench pressing movements. So I just go to the stuff that feels okay. And if there's stuff that's kind of a yellow light-ish, where if I'm not careful with it, or like if loading it up really, really heavy tends to start aggravating it, then okay, cool. Well, there's certain things that I will stay out of certain load and rep ranges that seem to aggravate it. So therefore, maybe my rep range has to stay a little higher and I have to use a little bit less weight. And then anything that's like straight up green light, it's go hard, right? Push really hard through it, load it up heavy, train, and ultimately keep the consistency of the overall experience going. And then layer in on top of that, one of the best things every trainer coach should do is develop a relationship with really skilled physical therapists. Physical therapists are like trainers. There are a lot of really bad, unqualified ones out there. There are a lot of physical therapists who know nothing about strength and conditioning. They know nothing about lifting. Those are probably not going to be the best people to send your clients who are training too, because they're not going to have a strong foundation in that realm. So the guys that I work with, they work with, they themselves are lifters. One of them is a, very, very serious lifter. And the other one is a PhD who's worked with tons of athletes and strength athletes. So he can definitely handle, stuff like a bodybuilder's, shoulder discomfort, or, a lot of the aches and pains and concerns and problems and injuries that my clientele come up against sometimes. So if you have those kind of professionals to refer your clients to, let alone yourself working to, well, that's a great way to keep your clients on track and show value. It's not, oh, I'm referring something out, now all of a sudden I'm losing the client. No, you're actually helping the client deal with this long-term injury that they've always kind of had, and allow you to keep progressing them while having someone in your corner that helps give you a little bit of guidance to say, okay, listen, like do this and get this strong, but try to avoid this kind of stuff for this person for the next little while. And it helps you do your job better, and it enhances the client experience. And there's obviously the professional relationship where if you refer business one way, I don't refer business out to anyone with the expectation of anything in return. I don't think you should do anything with the expectation of a specific return. Go through your career with an abundance mindset. A lot of good stuff will come back to you, but people will also probably start referring stuff back to you.
Yeah, like reciprocity, really. So you're kind of talking about the red light, green light, amber light with in terms of like what you can do and ranges of motion. I think people kind of debate like using full range of motion, half range of motion. Do you have any like opinion on that? And like, when it's best to use full and when it's, more appropriate to use half ranges?
I'll probably get a little blunt on this one, and I'll try to add some nuance, because usually I don't think in terms of black and white, but most of the time when people are using partial range of motion, it's just an excuse to ego lift, right? And I'll call that bullshit on its face. Everybody individually has different range of motion that they have access to based on their injury history is a big one, or their anthropometry, your limb length. You get a very tall squatter with very long femurs, they're probably going to struggle to squat, sometimes even to parallel, certainly deep below parallel. It also depends on your hip socket shape and your mobility of your hips. I think one of the best things you can and should do is learn to move really, really well. You can do targeted mobility stuff to enhance your ability to enter ranges of motion for better training effect, but work within a range of motion that you can safely enter. So let's use the example of a squat. Make sure you're effectively loading in through your heels on, a normal loaded squat. Yes, I get 60 squats. That's a little different. Maintain a neutral spine. And if you can squat, virtually ass to grass and maintain a neutral spine, well, and there's certainly no discomfort in your knees and no history of injury with your knees, then that's a safe thing for you to do. And you probably should maximize it. If you're struggling to get much below parallel before, your spine collapses, your butt wigs aggressively, a little butt wig is not going to hurt anybody. Okay, cool. Well, if you have someone lay down on the ground and you test their passive range of motion of their hips, and you find out that they can absolutely do, ass to grass, but when you put them with a barbell on their shoulders, well, it's just the stability of how much surface area touch point is like on the ground. And so that becomes, all right, well, maybe someone in the back squat, they collapse, but all of a sudden I put a dumbbell in their hands, a goblet squat, they actually get much deeper. So it's center of gravity of the load. So you got to find the right exercise for that person to be able to use the proper range of motion. But yeah, and I'm fine with someone who squats to, just slightly below parallel. If they go a little bit deeper, their form starts to break down a bit. You can try to coach that a bit. But it's when I see someone who's squatting, 2 inches above parallel, they got way too much weight on the bar. Their knees are wavering around, and it looks like someone just call the ambulance and have it on standby because something really horrible is going to happen here. When I see stuff like that, it's kind of like, all right, like, what are you doing? Like, are you trying to actually get strong and build muscle for the long run, or are you trying to fake the appearance of strength? It's the same thing as someone who's doing, bench press that has like 3 inches of range of motion that doesn't lock out but doesn't touch their chest, and they're pumping them out. Okay, super. You're really training that range of motion, but you're missing a lot of other training effect, and you're getting suboptimal results. And I know you're using more weight than you can control. It's an excuse to use more weight than most people can control. Is the problem. So, and it depends on if it's your client. If it's some like kid in the gym or some old guy in the gym who's been doing it for years, don't even waste your time. Like your intrusion is going to be unwelcome. You're not going to save them from it. But if you got a client in front of you who's really married to ego lifting, well, it goes back to the trust and then bringing it back down to something that is safest for them. And I've worked with a lot of clients who, they trust you through the process and they've changed. And I've worked with a few who they always kind of emotionally want to default to lifting a certain way that they lift. So it does become a bit of a work in progress to get that person to buy into making change that ultimately is going to be safer and better for the results.
Good. Yeah. So you're on team full range of motion and you're not on team ego lifting, which is, definitely not a way to go.
And that's in of itself sort of, it is a bit of a false dichotomy. I am team full range of motion. I am team train through the fullest available range of motion you can safely train through, right? It's not full range of motion blindly on every exercise without understanding what the definition of full range of motion is for that individual exercise. If you're doing a dumbbell row and you're cocking your elbow way above and behind your back and the head of your humerus is dumping forward in the socket, that's full range of motion, but that's actually completely missing the target muscle. It's creating I don't like using language like this, but a faulty movement pattern that is probably going to increase the likelihood of pain or injury down the road with your rotator cuff or the long head of your bicep tendon, to get a little technical on people. So it's knowing what is the best range of motion, the correct, the safest, the most productive range of motion for any individual exercise. And sometimes there's argument about that too. And it just becomes trying to plug into the best resources and an array of the smartest, most trustworthy people in the industry to learn these techniques from.
So it makes me think that's where the benefit of a coach like one of us comes in, where we can tell people it's a good time to go full range, and then it's another time where you want to cut the range and individualize the range of motion to what you have capable to you.
And sometimes we have limited range. I have a client right now who has a fairly serious shoulder injury that she's recovering from, and she came to me to kind of be part of that rehabilitation process. And her ability to do basically loaded pushing exercises is virtually non-existent. I'm going to probably introduce some isometric holds and some very limited range of motion based on what she can do pain-free. And the goal is to help restore that range of motion and get her stronger through the entirety of it. She's also working with a very skilled physical therapist that I trust to guide that process. So it's appropriate to the situation, the client.
Yeah, I find those situations can be the most rewarding because initially they're the most challenging. You might be kind of working with the most limited ability for the client, but then when you work through that and you get them to a stronger position with their pushing movements like what you're working on, it can be like mind blowing for the client to see the progress they can make when they just stay consistent with their training. So then just kind of going back to, you were talking about abundance, and I feel like that's kind of related to like people's mindset or their outlook. And you had a post on like people fail because they try to be perfect. So you could talk like a little bit about, I guess, abundance and perfectionism and just the mindset of, I guess, maintain your health for the long term.
Well, perfectionism can be the instinct for people to want to be perfect in everything can be discouraging because a lot of people never end up following through or finishing on things, where they're never satisfied with the effort. So perfectionism tends to set up another false dichotomy, this pass fail, and a very, very, very difficult barrier for passing. And if you facilitate that inadvertently with your clients, or if they have that mindset and they fail frequently, then they tend to get discouraged and they tend to, get off track, and they tend to fall off workout programs and then break the lifestyle habit consistency. So that's where perfectionism is kind of the enemy of progress. So it just becomes, having nuanced conversations with the client, or even with yourself, if perfectionism is one of your obstacles with your career stuff, to get you off the ledge of that false dichotomy, that very rigid pass fail metric, and to be happy with very good, and to realize that this is more than good enough. And it's not just being satisfied with mediocre, but it's going, okay, if I publish this article, okay, maybe if I spend another 20 hours on it, I can squeeze out a few more pieces of something I feel is a little bit better, but it's more than good enough to put up on my website. So I get to the next one and I can, meet the calendar that I want to publish this stuff on. So, it applies in every aspect of our industry. So it's just one of those things that we have to recognize and then we kind of have to bring ourselves down off the ledge of it.
Yeah, because like I like to think that perfection or perfect doesn't really exist, because it's just not really sustainable. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to fall short. But very good is like, it is very good. And if you can keep that rate of output up over the long term, that's much more sustainable. And then just the abundance, that kind of mindset you were talking about. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Well, I try to, and yeah, sure. I got a couple more minutes before I have a client walking in. I try to approach everything I do within the industry, certainly the social media, online stuff, with an abundance mindset. You're going to get a lot further if you just without any expectation of any reciprocal behavior or return, you share other people's stuff. I'm not worried that if I share a whole bunch of other coaches on my Instagram or mention them in an article, that my clientele or potential clients are going to go and all of a sudden turn around and train with Tony Gentilcore or Dean Somerset or go sign on with Mike Isertel's Renaissance Periodization. If anything, I can enrich my client's experience by exposing them to all these other people that may have resources that I can't create, articles on every topic of nutrition and training that's possible. And, full-time coaching plus trying to do what I can, there's limits to what I can do. So at the same time, I think we need to see more of this abundance mindset. I'll use an example, and then there's a guy who I found followed me. It's about 70,000 followers. I'm like, oh, this guy's got a big account, whatever, cool. I follow him back to check out more of his stuff. And then after a little while, he makes a comment on a post that I shared about other people. I didn't include him in it. It was relevant to him. And he inserts himself in as like, hey, me. And it's like, and I'm responding like, that's kind of not how this works. It's like, you kind of got to go and do things and put yourself out there and kind of earn those responses. So what do you fine, whatever. I've never seen him share anybody else's stuff. And after a little while, one of his things popped up and I look and he's no longer following me. And I'm like, okay, fine. Well, if someone has gone and played follow unfollow games and I follow them, then I usually just unfollow them, because I'm like, unless I really am plugged into their stuff or I know them personally, then I'm just like, fuck this. So a few months later, he pops back up and follows again and reaches out to me and asks if I'd come on his podcast. Now, I've since looked and realized that for a guy with 70,000 followers, he gets, 100 comments on his posts. He's bought his following. It's a fake following, right? So he's just trying to create the illusion of authority. Okay, fine. It tells me a little bit about him. Fine. And not the end of the world. People do it, but it's still something. And then I'm like, hey, yeah, sure. I'd love to come on your podcast. He's like, hey, and do you think I could come on to yours? And I'm like, hey, man, listen, I'm sorry. Like, I don't do, trade for trade or like, and I get a bunch of people asking themselves like to come on. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't take guests based on request. And then, so I didn't hear any response from him. And so I go back a week later to use this example, and he's unfollowed me again. It's just like, this is someone who is the complete antithesis of abundance mindset. And I'm like, I want nothing to do with helping or supporting this person based on their behavior. Whereas I probably would have relatively organically in time if he'd been, abundant in his own mindset, right? But he's not. He's a scarcity. So just use that example in how to behave and how not to behave in the industry. And there will be people, you'll share the hell out of their stuff and they're not going to be able to give much back to you. But then there's going to be people who are just like going out of their way to share everything that you're doing, who are raving fans of your work. And then there's no way you can possibly give back to them. So it more than evens out. And I believe if you really approach the world with an abundance mindset, people collectively will give 10 times of what you can give. So I'm out of time. I apologize, my friend, but Ross, I appreciate you having me on here.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thanks very much. We'll catch up again in the DMs, and thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. And if anybody does want to ask me questions or whatever, please, I respond to everything. You can find my Instagram at Andrew Coates Fitness. I love questions, so I'm always responsive. Ross, thank you so much, my friend.
Brilliant. Have a good day.
You too, brother.